You probably had to take an oath bathed in blood, like around a bunch of people with hoods, like staring down at you, right?
I definitely have taken oaths.
Do Freemasons make you take a blood oath with a bunch of guys dressed in cloaks in order to protect the world's secrets that could overthrow any world government? Is it more expensive to be vegan in San Diego than it is to be vegan in the Midwest? Find out the answer to these questions and more in the third episode of the Josh the Collins podcast, where I sat down with Christian Moreno and we talked about music, veganism, and I asked him a bunch of questions about being a Freemason. So stay tuned and watch, or listen on your audio app if you're on an audio app, and subscribe or follow or do whatever you got to do to make sure you can keep watching these interesting episodes where I talk to people from a lot of different backgrounds about a lot of different stuff. Thanks for watching or listening, and have a great day. Hope you enjoy. I don't know anything about Freemasonry. I know the general idea of veganism, and I feel like
Yeah,
we've had quite a few conversations about veganism, whether it's the ethical side of it, the actual interesting side of it, and the practical side of it as well. But I guess I
yeah,
kind of want to start with the veganism, right?
yeah. Let's do
I
it.
think that'd be kind of cool. So my question for you is not why are you vegan, because I already know that. I mean, I feel like
Yeah,
most people are vegan for one or like maybe two or three reasons. The
yeah,
ethical side of it, the physical side of it, because they're getting sick from all the crappy food that they're eating, or it's just something they
hmm
got into one way or another. They were vegetarian for a while and they became vegan. I'm
yeah,
sure there's other reasons too, but I feel like you fit into the first/second category pretty well, right?
yeah. Definitely. That's how it started. It was, and for a lot of people, I feel like I've seen, and I don't meet that many other vegans, but from what I've seen, it does sometimes with the health reasons. Sometimes it starts with the ethics. For me, it definitely started with the health. Was having, health issues, digestive issues. I used to get heartburn every, I used to think that heartburn was just like a regular thing. I thought that was like how you were supposed to feel after you ate, like
That
all the
sucks.
time. And like being a kid, like I remember being a little kid and being like, and just getting used to it and being like, okay, I guess this is life. Like your throat hurts after you eat anything, you know? And then finally I told somebody about it and they're like, no, you're not supposed to feel pain after you eat. And I was like, oh, okay, something's wrong here. So I started cutting out. I did it really slowly. I know some people kind of just go cold turkey and cut everything out. I did it really slow. Started cutting out. Okay, I'm gonna cut out pork and wait a month, see how I feel. Felt great. I'm gonna cut out red meat. Wait a month, felt even better. Great. I'm gonna cut out chicken. And it just kind of went through the whole list. Finally, I was a vegetarian for, I don't know, like 6 months. And then that's when I had just moved to Ohio. So that was about four-ish years ago now. And that's when I had just moved there. And Marianne and I it kind of lined up really well because she had already been a vegetarian for a while. And I kind of caught up to speed right before I moved in. And we both kind of were like, okay, let's make the jump, let's try out veganism. And so at first it was all the health reasons, and then going into veganism, it was definitely for ethics. I remember sitting down, watching some documentaries, doing some research, reading some literature, and eventually being like, shit, yeah, I should probably do this. It was a hard process though. I remember in the beginning, um, I mean, you fail every now and then. So I remember one time we had been vegan for like a week and we broke and we were like, fuck, we really want a pizza. And we ordered a pizza
Yeah.
and it got to the door and we opened it up and we both took a bite. We're like, oh shit. And like it just was not the same. All of a sudden we couldn't do it. And we are like, this is kind of gross. And like and it was our favorite pizza. Like we normally would be super excited and all of a sudden we were like, oh, I don't think we can finish this. And we threw the whole thing away. We are like, fuck, we can't eat this anymore.
That's really
And
rough. It was not an easy process, I imagine, then to go from um, changing. I mean, I guess it's not an easy process no matter what your diet is, right? Like I've changed my diet quite a bit
yeah,
lately, and I've been working out a whole lot more and getting in much better shape. And just the steps I've had to take as
I've
far as
noticed.
like, yeah, it's been hard, really hard work. But like,
Yeah.
just from fasting to try not to eat as much food when I'm eating, or not to eat this type of food or whatever, it's difficult. But have you noticed like
Yeah.
anything particularly more difficult when it comes to like not eating meat? Like, for example, is it more difficult to be vegan because there's less choices that are widely available for people that are vegan by chance?
You know, I think a lot of times it can be. It really depends on location too, right? When we were in, in Tri-County, like yeah, it was difficult. There wasn't a ton of there's a couple. I'll give Cincinnati credit. There was like a handful of vegan restaurants. I think there was like maybe three or four vegan restaurants when we were there. So, we would go to those same places all the time. Out here, though, I mean, it's almost like in every corner of town, there's three or four, it's everywhere. So it's definitely, I feel I can see it spreading. I can see more places having the options, more and more times I'm going to restaurants and I'm seeing the Beyond Burger is like the go-to. Like, oh, they have the Beyond Patty. I can make something vegan out of it. Um, it does get kind of inconvenient sometimes, especially going out with family. And not everybody wants to eat vegan. So and I got family that are bodybuilders, so they like the meat, they like to eat big, and so that it can be difficult sometimes. But like anything else, you learn tricks to work around it. We prepare food before we go to family gatherings. We before we go out to eat with family, we'll first eat at home a little bit just in case.
So that way,
So
if
you
you're
kind of
stuck
have
with
to
the
be
appetizers,
prepared.
you're okay.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And as far as like the
yeah.
bodybuilder, like family members part, right? Um, since I mean, I'm not a bodybuilder at all. I'm not, I'm not in super great shape, but I'm much closer to doing that than I've ever been before. And
Yeah.
one thing I've noticed is when I'm working out and I'm done, I have this insatiable craving for protein that I've never had in my entire life before. And that's just because I'm doing like
Mm,
this high intensity interval training stuff with like weightlifting every single day, or maybe like 3 days
mm,
of weightlifting, 1 day of really hard cardio, and then right back into that again. So, do you know
mm.
much about people that lift weights and are vegan? Because I feel like I've heard stories about some of them, but then I've heard like really bad things as well because you need like a very specific supplement list if you go vegan and do that same kind of like intense physical activity.
I've
I might be asking you
admittedly,
like
I
way too
don't know as
much.
much as I. No, 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 it's totally fine. I should. I wish I did. I kind of wish Marianne were here because she definitely goes more into detail with the sciencey side of veganism and how all that works. We'll have to get her on here one of these days. But I know of vegan athletes who have gone vegan and have thrived doing so. Um, but I don't know the specifics. No, I don't personally know any,
Okay.
vegan athletes that are like really big into it that, so not as much as I probably should. But
Have,
I've heard that you can be successful doing it. And I've heard that, as long as you're eating clean and eating the right things that it's possible,
yeah. Have you found that so being in San Diego, obviously you've got a lot more options for vegan food, right? Have you found that
Oh
you've
yeah,
suffered any like
definitely.
quality loss as far as like price of food on the West Coast versus the East Coast? Or not East Coast, but I guess we're kind of East Coast, Midwest, and Ohio. But
Oh,
like when you go to restaurant or when you go to
yeah.
the grocery store here, it's farm to table for most of it over here, especially because the farmers that grow all the produce we eat are like a mile from the store. You know what I mean? Whereas in
Yeah, yeah,
California, I know
yeah,
there's a lot of farms, but there's a lot of stuff that's coming from farther away. Have you noticed like any sort of like
yeah.
increased price when you go to the West Coast for that kind of stuff, or like decreased quality at all?
You know, honestly, I was expecting that when we moved back out here. I was mentally prepared. Oh, like get ready for the expensive food, get ready for all the prices to go up, and it really wasn't that bad. I don't think I noticed. The only thing that really went up in price was the gas. I mean, like,
Well, that
but
and the rent, right?
other than that and the rent, that and the rent for sure. The rent was a big one. Um, so rent prices went up, gas went up, but grocery store stuff, not as much. And I didn't see any quality difference. Honestly, there are a few, if you know the right spots, you can get even cheaper food out here.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um,
So
you
what
know,
what
yeah,
kind of uh what kind of fast food restaurants offer vegan options that are like good go to, like you can drive through and grab them? And I'm not talking like in and out
Carl's
like
Jr.
specific to California, but Carlos Jr. does?
Carl's Jr. Carl's Jr. is the I don't know if they have those back in I think they're called Hardee's in Ohio, uh, something like that. But yeah, Carl's Jr. They have the Carl's Jr. and Burger King are the two biggest ones right now, I think.
Yeah, I've had the Impossible
I
Whopper
don't
from Burger King before. I just said Burger King.
yeah,
Burger King, gosh.
I'm not the hugest fan of the Impossible from Burger King.
Me either.
I have had it a handful of times. In a pinch, I've had to have it, and honestly, it's not anywhere near, to me personally, it's not as good as the Impossible Burger from Carl's Jr. I go to Carl's Jr. way more than I should, and,
I'll have to try that out for sure.
especially because I you should. It's really good. I've got roommates that don't mind it at all. They like it, and yeah, I work nights. I get off at midnight, and there's a 24-hour Carl's Jr. down the street. I go there, and I get the Beyond Famous Star, no cheese, no mayo, and it's delicious,
I'll have to try
delicious
it
and
out
fast.
because I've had the Burger King one, and the only thing I thought about the Burger King one is that it kind of tastes like a grill. Like, not grilled meat, it just tastes like whatever I imagine is left over on a grill, and it's really dry. And everybody kept telling me, "Oh, this tastes like a Whopper," and I'm like, no, it tastes like a Whopper that somebody made, and then you scraped off the rest of it with chalk, mix that up, and put it on a bun. Sorry, Burger King. I guarantee you'll never be a sponsor of this podcast after I said that. But what I wanted to ask you
Oh,
was
nice.
about I wanted to ask you about Freemasonry because I don't know very much
Yeah.
about it. I've heard a brief description from you about what Freemasonry is. I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories about
Mhm.
what Freemasonry is, like how you guys hold on to secrets of the world and don't tell anybody. And Ben Franklin's passed along a key for the longest time that gives you access to his sex dungeon where he keeps children clones and all that stuff in there. And you guys have the secrets to overthrow the government. So I'm really curious what your description of it is. Like, I guess not your description. I'm curious what the actual description of Freemasonry is, and then what Freemasonry
Mhm.
means to you as, yourself.
For sure, for sure. Good question. So, and yeah, there's so much misinformation out there. So many people get the wrong idea of what we are, who we are, and why we are. And um, you know, so how do I put this? So, Freemasonry is the world's oldest, largest, and oftentimes called the most prestigious fraternity. Um, we just keep finding older and older records of ourselves, right? Before the year 1717, we were somewhat of a secret society and nobody really knew we existed. But in the year 1717, the Grand Lodge of England came out and said, hey, here we are, we're a thing. We have found records of ourselves dating back as far as 1390. Um, and there is a lot of speculation on where we come from and why we started and how the organization started. And even Masonic historians kind of go back and forth on, who believes what. There's some theories that are very simple. Oh, we came from actual stonemason guilds in England that started to allow in non stonemasons. They were just called Freemasons. They're just regular people. And it somehow turned into this philosophical order along with being somewhat of a trade union, right? Because that's what it was. It was a guild, so much like a modern union. Um, whereas some people believe there's this connection to the Knights Templar and even further back, a connection to the early Jerusalem church and further back to Egypt. And so there's a lot of speculation on just where we come from. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, somewhere in some weird mix of all of them. But there's no way to know until we get some further evidence.
You wouldn't be able to confirm or deny that the existence of aliens or any sort of like old prophecies that you guys hold on to with ancient secret rituals or anything like that, right?
I can tell you that I wish I heard something about aliens, but
Ah,
I can honestly tell you I never have heard any talk of aliens or anything like that. As far as us holding on to certain secrets, it is it is a known fact that the Knights Templar first, when they were kind of formed, they went to Jerusalem. They went underground into these chambers that were there in the Holy Land, and they found something very interesting. Um, that information is supposedly passed on to the Freemasons, and that's where we may or may not get some of our rituals and things like that.
oh, so what you're
A lot
saying,
of
what
that is still
you're
speculation.
being very careful with the way you're saying this right here. You're saying using speculation, and there's been hearsay that this may have
Yeah.
happened. And you haven't confirmed or denied anything. I wonder if you had to take you probably had to take an oath bathed in blood, like around a bunch of people with hoods, like staring down at you, right?
I definitely have taken oaths. Nobody was bathed in blood,
Oh
and
man.
sadly, no one was wearing robes. We all wear suits to these meetings. I want to bring the robes back. I want to bring the robes back. If it were up to me, we would be wearing robes, but we're not. But the reason it's speculation is because there are some Masonic writers and historians that go that direction, and they really try to pull up all this old stuff and find all these loose connections to older societies and older ancient people. And then there are some Masonic historians who are like, no, all of that's fabricated, all of that's a fantasy, and we just come from these stonemason guilds, and there's no question about it, and all of that is just ridiculousness. So you've got in our own, you've got people on both sides who, some want to believe the more fanciful tales, and some want to say, no, the truth is really not that interesting. It's kind of boring, you know.
So what kind of
And it's
things do you
hard
do?
sometimes. I read both. So for me personally, I believe that, and I've been kind of going along with this idea. Something I've been thinking about and writing about recently is that Masonry is, I'm starting to call it the three P's of Masonry: practice, preservation, and passing on. And that's what Masonry is about: practicing, preserving, and passing on what I would call the ancient mysteries. And that is ancient philosophies that somehow we have gotten. A lot of Masons study Hermeticism and the Kabbalah and things like that.
Can you elaborate on what the
And
Hermeticism
these,
and Kabbalah is for a moment?
sure, Hermeticism started as I believe it started in Egypt. And well, yeah, it did start in Egypt from the prefix of that word, Hermes, was an Egyptian god, but he was a real person as well. His name was Thoth Hermes. And his philosophy is very simple in some ways, but it runs very deep. Hermeticism is, to put it simply, is the idea, one of the principles of Hermeticism is the idea that we live in a mental universe, right? And one of the easiest ways that they described this in some of their literature is, if I asked you, Josh, how do you create things? What do you use to create something?
Are you actually asking me that question, or are you asking as like a rhetorical
Yeah,
question?
yeah, I'm asking. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, like what do I
No, no,
use
I'm
to
asking
create?
you right now. What would you,
Okay. Uh,
yeah, how do you create things just in general? Like a house, this
a house.
podcast, a table,
Okay. I would say,
anything,
I would
like
say,
how do you,
I would say, how would I create things? It starts with imagination first. So I've got to visualize what I want, or I guess a solution to a problem that I have first, and try to. I think that's like the
hmm
first step in creating anything, is to try to figure out what you want to
hmm
create first. But then I don't know, various tools,
hmm
various instruments, and materials. I have no idea what that question really means, so I feel like I'm giving the worst answer in
yes,
the world.
okay. No, that's perfect. You gave a perfect answer. So the first thing you said was, oh, you got to think about what you want to create first, and then you need tools and materials, right? Well, um, uh, some science tells us that, we can't add or subtract to the universe, right? Matter doesn't just disappear. Things don't come out of nowhere,
It
right?
just gets
A
manipulated.
house doesn't just pop up. Yeah, exactly. You cut down a tree, you take the wood, you form it into a house. You need materials to create, right? But the other way that we create, like you just said, is in your head first. You can visualize a house being made. You can visualize nothing and then visualize a house. And it didn't take you anything. You didn't add or subtract materials. It's just there. And so there's this philosophy that, well, and I'm no master on philosophy, by the way. I'm very much I've only been a Mason for 5, 6 years, and while I've gotten pretty far in it and I've learned a whole lot, I'm in no way perfect at this, so I might botch this description here. But from what I've read, the idea is, okay, if we can't add or subtract from the universe, if we can't just make things appear like that, um, how did all this come to be? Where did all this come from? It couldn't have come from nothing. It had to come from somewhere. But if we can't trace an origin, well, it's mental. Everything here is created in the mind of something. It's not in the mind of some creature or some entity necessarily, but just this is all a mental projection, and that's kind of the general idea behind Hermeticism is the mentalness of the all is what they call it,
Mm.
and that's what this is. We're just in the projection in the mind of something,
Is that something that follows
and then
along
it goes
with?
into a lot more.
Is that something that follows along with like specific religions that you might find that are more predominant in like Freemasonry, or is that something that's just like uh, a philosophy that some people kind of research and dive into?
More of that one, more a philosophy that some people kind of research and dive into. The nice thing about Masonry is that we revere and respect all forms of the ancient mysteries. Right now, Masonry started in the West, so most Masons do tend to follow sort of Western esoteric traditions like Hermeticism, and the Kabbalah is another one. The Kabbalah is much older and has gone through, not much older. The Kabbalah is not, I don't know if it's older than Hermeticism, but it's also very old. And it's gone through a lot of different stages. The Kabbalah started as the hidden science of, of the Hebrews, of Judaism. And it was something that only select rabbis were allowed to study and allowed to pass on to their students. Since then, it has kind of moved from hand to hand, and somehow some Freemasons got a hold of it and kind of mixed it with the Hermeticism. And now you have Hermetic Kabbalah, which is a mixture of the two. And, a lot of Freemasons do like to study that. Um, but there are Masons of every religion. There are, Muslim Freemasons. I'm sure there's Hindu Freemasons. There's, and we accept all of them and we revere them all. And something that I have found through, studying Hermeticism, studying the Kabbalah, studying Taoism, reading the Tao Te Ching, is that you start to find this connection between all of them, this simple connection between all of them when it comes to the way that they describe source and the way they describe, the way they talk about philosophy, and it's incredible, and to me that's what masonry is all about, practicing it. So practicing being a Freemason, taking time to study these things, taking time to incorporate them into my life. I'm thinking about masonry every single day, a lot every single day, that I keep the symbols on me, on my rings, on my car, on just things that I have to remind me, keep it in my head all day. It's practicing being a Freemason. Preservation is the other important aspect of it. We have a long history, and I want to keep that history going. And I want to preserve it. I want to make sure that it doesn't get lost to time as it has in the past. So preservation is really important, and then passing on, making sure that we're passing on this information to those that want it. And I know a lot of people tend to have reservations about the fact that we keep secrets, and they think like, oh, why are you, if it's such good information, why aren't you just telling everybody? You know,
Does that have
if you
anything to do
want
with?
it, it's there.
Does that have anything to do with like the idea that once information is widely available, it's almost like that telephone game where I tell one person this information, but I've switched it around a little bit, and this person tells somebody else, and by the time it gets around for so long, it's no longer the same information that was originally started. Is that maybe a reason why it's kind of held as more like secretive than like what you'd find in like Wikipedia or
That's
something like that?
that's a really good question. I don't know I haven't heard that before specifically. I don't believe so, but I would say that I mean, yeah, it's probably for the best because you're right. If the information was widely available, and to some extent it is, man. You can go on Google if you wanted to and find a lot of stuff about Freemasonry, things that I you can go on Google right now and look up some stuff about Freemasonry and ask me about it, and I'm gonna be like, I can't talk about it. Sorry. Like I can't, like there's a lot of stuff on the internet that are secrets that we're not supposed to talk about. Um, so it's already out there. And I think you're absolutely right, because what happens when it's out there, it gets misunderstood and people think we're Satanists and they think we run the world and that we're, dark sorcerers or some, you know, I don't know,
I
some
mean,
amphibian race of people. I don't know. There's all sorts of.
I imagine if all Freemasons were dark sorcerer, Satan worshipping like world leaders, that most of you wouldn't live in a house with roommates or have to pay rent or have a real job, you know. So that's one reason why, like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I'd necessarily believe all that stuff, but it is kind of interesting, and it's always fun to like look at it in a different way. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious then. So like, as this being a fraternity, what kind of things does somebody need to do? Like, what kind of guidelines does somebody need to fit to be able to join the Freemasons?
Good question. Yeah. So a common phrase, I think it comes from the Bible, but it might be older than that, is seek and you shall find, knock and the doors shall be opened unto you. And that's kind of the way Freemasonry is. We don't recruit. I don't like, I know we've had talks about Masonry in the past, but I've never outright been like, Josh, you should join up, like here's the application. You should, we don't recruit. It's very, and that's a very important thing about Masonry because we want people to want to be Masons. We're not trying to convince anybody to join. If you feel called to be a Mason and to study the ancient mysteries and to be a part of the brotherhood, come, let's see if you're a good match, but we're not out there just trying to pick anybody off the streets to join. Um, the requirements for being a Mason, one, you have to want it yourself. You have to be the person going after it. You have to be a man. Right now, Masonry does not allow women, although there are certain Masonic jurisdictions that do allow women Freemasons. There is uh, a system of recognition, is what we call it, where that's how you are validated as a Freemason, as a Masonic jurisdiction. And it starts with the Grand Lodge of England because they're the first one, right? So generally, they give recognition to other Grand Lodges. The Grand Lodge of California, right, has recognition from them. So we are recognized as a legitimate Grand Lodge and a legitimate Masonic jurisdiction. Some places get that revoked for breaking certain rules. And so you have jurisdictions that allow women in, and technically they're not recognized, but they're doing the same thing. They're just allowing women.
Mm.
So one of the rules, as of right now, is no women allowed, although people break that rule. The other rule is that you must be of age. So you have, and that changes per state. Some states it's 18, some states it's 21. You have to be freeborn, although that doesn't really matter anymore because slavery is not as big as it was back then. You have to
So
have
wait, did
never
that?
committed a crime.
So does that, as freeborn, does that
Go
mean
for it.
that like back in the day you couldn't have been a slave originally, or you could not be a Freemason if you were a slave when you were born?
Correct. To my knowledge, that I believe that's what it means.
Interesting.
But
That's
I
interesting.
don't. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure when that changed. There's a lot of things in Masonry, a lot of verbiage
Doesn't apply
that kind of
anymore.
goes right by. That doesn't apply anymore because it's fucking old, you know.
Yeah.
So you got to be freeborn. You have to have never committed a crime of moral turpitude, is what they call it, a morally wrong crime. And
How do you
you know,
define
so if
that?
you have a um, we do a background check to see if you have a like a criminal record. And obviously, if something comes up, like if you, I don't know, if you killed somebody, you know, we'd be like, sorry, you know, depending on the circumstances, of course, we'd probably be like, nah, that's, you know, we're not going to let you in.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think there is a way that we kind of do that ourselves, and it really depends on the person joining to fess up and say what they've done, right? So when I joined and I read that, oh, never a crime of moral turpitude, I was like, oh shit, like I called and I was like, hey, I've got like 3 speeding tickets. Is that a crime of moral turpitude? Like I wasn't following the rules. I was speeding pretty bad. I was doing like 90 and like and they're like, no, that's totally fine. That just tells us you know how to have a good time. We're good. And like and I was like, okay,
So
fantastic.
they're pretty liberal with the
Um,
word moral in that regard. So like if you've smoked marijuana, or maybe you've got in trouble for like, a fight when you were 16, it's not going to kick you. You don't have to be perfect like schoolboy to like
yeah,
get in. Okay. But you can't,
exactly,
but what you're telling me is I
exactly.
could not
Yeah.
go commit a bunch of murders and then try to become a Freemason afterwards.
Yes, 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 absolutely,
Dang. Okay.
absolutely.
I'll keep that in
Yeah.
mind.
No murders, no rapes. Probably some forms of like fraud or like being a con man. They probably wouldn't like, you know, things like that. You know, but as far as like, you know, you even said like smoking weed. You know, I one of my brothers, I won't say his name to oust him, but you know, I smoke weed, and every now and I remember walking up to, you know, when you're in a room, I'm a young guy. A lot of these other Masons are, you know, older gentlemen who are well established and have,
Mm-hmm.
you know, fruitful careers and all of that. I remember looking at one of the other young guys in the room and asked him, and he was like, "Do you want to like go for a drink or something?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, or I don't, and I remember asking like, do you smoke? And like we were really hush hush about it because I didn't know if he was gonna be cool with it or not. And he looked at me and he's like, uh, yeah, do you smoke? And I was like, I smoke a lot. He's like, I smoke a lot. And then after that, we were just smoking, but you know, some every now and then before, most of the time after meetings and stuff like that, we'd be getting high in the car, and it was really funny, really funny.
So what kind of rules does
So
somebody who's
yeah,
a what kind of rules does somebody who's a Freemason have to abide by, to continue being a Freemason and not like or not, what I said validate, that's not what I meant, and not like break any specific rules. Like, can you have tattoos? Can you have piercings? Can you get divorced? Can you do XYZ? Are there certain things that are very taboo being a Freemason, or certain things that you have to stay away from, aside from like, telling secrets or committing murder?
yeah, you know, in for the lodge, I do have to pay dues. When you petition to join, there's an application fee. It changes per lodge, really, and per state a whole lot. I do pay dues yearly, not too much. I think it's like somewhere between $100 and $200 a year,
That's not bad.
which isn't, yeah, it's not too bad. And and honestly, it's funny, we were doing the math and it hasn't changed, even compared to like when my lodge started in 1850, counting for like how much money was worth back then. It's been the same price like the whole time. um,
So they're not price
but
gouging everybody and stealing money from anybody, which is good.
Yeah, no. And the nice thing is they do work with you. I mean, they want you there. This isn't, they're not debt collectors. So I've come into hard times. I've been in and out of other jobs in the past, and when I have to pay dues, and I'm like, hey, I can't pay all of my dues right now. They'll be like, okay, no problem, don't worry about it. And I'll be like, here's $20, and they'll write it down. Okay, yeah, we got 20 in your tab. Just give us money whenever you got it. It's not they really don't pressure you about it, which is really nice. So you do have to pay dues. There are certain Masonic etiquettes behind closed doors, and just like while we're hanging out, certain people do have certain titles. So yeah, so the people do have titles. So there is some etiquette as to like how you address certain people. There are stations in the lodge, so there are like officer positions. For the last couple of years, I've been an officer at my lodge. I started out as the marshal, and then this year I was the chaplain. And next year I'll be moving to a different lodge because of my work schedule. I'll be at a different lodge and I'll be what's known as the senior deacon. Um, and different when you're the master of the lodge, you're like top dog of the lodge, you're in charge of everybody in the lodge. When you're that guy, you are referred to as worshipful. That's your title,
Mm.
worshipful, and whatever the name is. And then when you're not master anymore, when you're what's called a past master, you're still referred to as that. Now, well, I know all these guys personally, so when I call up my Masonic friends that are past masters, a lot of the times, if it's a personal call, or if I'm hanging out with them, going to get lunch or something, they don't care. I call him Peter, right? He doesn't mind. I call him Dale. He doesn't mind. But when you're at a Masonic function, at a Masonic gathering, then it's appropriate to use the terms of, oh, worshipful. Do you need some help, or something like that? You refer to them as that. And then in other areas of Freemasonry, like in the Scottish Rite, there are more titles. And depending on, so you call some guys worshipful and other guys illustrious or honorable or most worshipful or something like that. So there are different titles that it's appropriate to adhere to. Um, there are some other small rules in the lodge as like when it comes to like what you can and can't do in the actual room. Unfortunately, those I don't believe I can go into too much detail
Oh
on,
yeah, I don't want to
but
make you get in
I
trouble because this is going to go on the internet for
oh
people to hear.
oh for sure. For sure. But I'll say it's akin to like a courtroom, right? You go to a courtroom, you can't just stand up in the jury and demand to talk to the judge. You know what I mean? Like there's rules and there's decorum and there's procedure. So it's similar to that. Outside of the lodge, the rules are, go to meetings as often as you can. They're not strict about it. Pay your dues in a timely manner when you can. They're not strict about it. Um, as long as you're not committing crimes or doing anything like that, they don't really care about your personal life. We've got brothers that have all sorts of tattoos. We've got brothers with piercings. We've got, we accept, I've got brothers that are homosexual. I've got brothers that are straight. I've got, it doesn't matter. We don't ask. It doesn't matter
What
to us,
about
even if we know.
what about transgenders? Because you said that women weren't allowed in. Is that something that you've run into before?
That's a really good question. I've often wondered that myself. I don't have an answer. I wish I did. Because I've been curious as to how that would work. I don't know that they ask. I feel like what to me, I would assume is if you identify as a man, we'll let you in. That's what I would hope for. I don't know that they abide by that, but I hope that they do. But I don't have the details on that. I wish I did though.
So I guess my next, or not my
Um,
next question, but my second to last question for you is actually kind of off of what you just said a second ago. So it seems like there's a lot of rules that are not too difficult to follow, like not killing people, pretty easy. Paying $100 or so
yeah,
every year, it seems pretty simple as well. Um,
yeah.
are there any like rules that are almost, how can I phrase it? Any rules, guidelines, or ways that you should act, think, or do as a Freemason that you found like a moral issue with, or something that you kind of struggled with, knowing that like, hey, this might have been created in the 1700s, but it doesn't really apply as much now, and it's something that's changing, as far as like them not allowing women in? Or is there anything that you run into that that you can speak on, that you're like, oh, this is something that I've had to try to figure out, but we're always constantly evolving, and maybe it'll change later?
Mm, very good question. The women issue is definitely one of the ones that me personally, and just as I probably should have said this from when we first started talking about masonry, but I'll say it now. Anything I say, just a little disclaimer, these are the opinions of myself as a member and not the expressed opinions or beliefs of any Grand Lodge or jurisdiction.
I'll put a
So they're
gigantic
not,
disclaimer right at the
you
beginning
know,
with that right there.
oh, perfect. Yeah,
Maybe we'll even
perfect.
use
Yeah.
this as the intro. So I'll use that as intro, you saying
Oh, no.
that, and then I'll probably cut in something that makes
Yeah.
you look really, really crazy right afterwards.
That that works. That works. Um, so the women issue is one of them that when I first heard about it, I was like, oh man, I kind of hope we, and get with the times and maybe eventually allow women in, because as far as I've seen, the reasoning behind not allowing women hasn't been as substantial as I would like. There are a lot of people still who hold to that rule and say, no, there definitely shouldn't be any women here. We have other organizations under the umbrella of Freemasonry that do allow women, that are recognized by my lodge, and other lodges. But I would hope that one day it would come to that, and those things have changed. In the past, only white people were allowed in, and anybody who was colored could not join Masonry, and any person of color couldn't join Masonry. Um, and there's a whole separate side of Masonry that is recognized, and they're called Prince Hall Masonry, and that was made specifically for people of color to join and to be a Mason, but to be surrounded by people of color. Um, and now we're kind of alongside each other. I can go to their meetings, they can come to ours. Great guys. We all
Yeah.
get along really well. It's almost it's the the tradition is still there, and they do things a little bit differently, but but it's the same thing. It's still Freemasonry.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Um,
I know. I mean, I
uh,
figured there was probably some gatekeeping, like in the 1700s. We didn't get along with everybody in the 1700s. We kind of like
yeah,
were
yeah,
pretty strict about
yeah.
like who was allowed and who wasn't allowed out, or who wasn't allowed in. So that's interesting. What kind of stuff do you get into that you can talk about if you were to go to a lodge meeting or do something specific to Freemasonry? I know that you mentioned a lot of studying, but do you do
Mhm.
specific activities, or are there like what would somebody expect if they were to go in for the first time? What would they expect to see?
Good question. So what I was told in the beginning was Masonry is what you make of it. There are some guys who come, they get the 3 degrees, and never see them again.
What are the
They
three
might come
degrees?
to the stated meeting.
What are the three
Oh,
degrees?
good. Yeah. So the 3 degrees are when you join a Masonic lodge, you join what's called a blue lodge or a craft lodge. There's other different words for it, but you join a Masonic lodge and you get conferred the 3 degrees of what's called craft masonry. You start as an entered apprentice. That's the first degree of masonry. And then they give you some materials, you do some studying. Eventually, when you feel like you're ready, you take a little bit of a test, and then you are passed to the second degree of Freemasonry, which is called a fellow craft. Um, Again, they give you some materials, you study, you take a little bit of a test, and then you are raised to the third degree of Freemasonry. That's when you're a master mason. At that point, they give you more materials, and for my lodge in particular, it's optional to take the next test. If you take the next test, you're eligible to become an officer. If you don't, it's okay. You're still a full-fledged member. Um, and those are the 3 degrees of masonry, and it stops there. The master mason degree is the highest degree in Freemasonry, hands down. Everybody on the internet wants to say like, "Oh, if you're not a 33rd, you don't know what's going on." No, no, no. The third degree is the highest degree. Once you're a third degree, you are equal to everybody, and that's something that I really love about masonry. It gives you this incredible balance of pride and humility where I am not better than anybody in those lodges, but by the same token, nobody there is above me as well, right? Now we do have officer ranks and people have titles, and we have to respect those traditions and respect those titles and the hard work that people put in to earn them. But it doesn't mean that they're a better Mason or a higher ranking Mason or something like that, right? We're all brothers, we're all equal. Um, so those are the 3 degrees, and then other bodies of Masonry can confer more degrees. The Scottish Rite goes all the way up to 32, and then there's an honorary 33rd degree that they choose. Like they'll pick people to be a 33rd degree. And then the York Rite doesn't usually go by numbers, but they have a few different chapters in the York Rite: the Royal Arch, the Cryptic Council, and the Knights Templar.
This is really
So
cool
there
because
are,
this all sounds like a video game to me. Like this all sounds like
yeah, yeah.
not to be rude, but it's just like there's all these different
No, it's
degrees that you
sick.
can
It
get.
does.
Like I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty interesting. So when you go in and you get to these degrees, like what do you do on any given day when you go into a lodge or like you are doing Freemason stuff? Is it all based on study or is there actual action that you have to take and things like that?
So, good question. So, there we have every lodge has a stated meeting once a month, and that's somewhat like a business meeting, right? We are an organization. A lot of us are listed as nonprofit organizations, I believe, and so we have meetings, business meetings. Are we going to pay our bills? Are we, things like that, mundane. Some of the stuff is quite mundane. Voting on new members, like this, just regular meeting stuff. Um, those are once a month. Some guys come in, they get their degrees. They come to a stated meeting every now and then, and you don't see them a whole lot. The real heart of Masonry, the work that gets done is conferring those 3 degrees. So when you get your degree, there is a ceremony, and the officers are the guys who are delivering that ceremony. I've heard people say that Masonry is kind of like it's kind of like a play almost,
Okay.
which I mean, kind of, I guess you can kind of loosely say it's kind of like a play. There's the candidate who's getting the degree, and then there are the officers who are giving that degree, and there is um, you do have their roles to play during those
Like
ceremonies,
a
so you do have
ritualistic
to
ceremony
learn.
thing.
Yeah, and so you do have to learn what you're doing in it. What's my role in this? What do I have to do during this degree? um, so that's what you kind of expect going into Masonry, is that's what you have to do. But a lot of people, like I said, just come in, get the degrees, and then you don't see them much. And for some people, it's the times don't line up. You can't make it to a degree. They're during your work hours, whatever the case may be. Um, but there's so much Masonic literature and books that there's always connected to the lodge by continuing to do your research and do your studies. And then there's all sorts of charity work that we do. So much charity work, especially out here in San Diego and in California. And other work to help out with in the lodges. At the Scottish Rite that I'm a part of, I'm on the library committee. And so just recently, I work in the library. I go down there on Mondays, and we're kind of going through our archives and cataloging things and getting organized because we're moving buildings soon. So, there's regular stuff like that needs to be done. That it's all volunteer work, though. Nobody told me to do it. It's just
Is it all
I like
volunteer?
books. I wanted to work.
Is it all volunteer based with
Yeah.
Freemasons, or are there Freemasons that actually take a salary from the dues or anything like that?
I believe that, as far as I'm concerned, I believe secretaries do get paid a little bit because they're like the backbone. Secretaries are the backbone of the lodge. They do, the secretary and the masters, they do so much. They're in there crunching the numbers. They're actually paying the bills. They're talking to, they're organizing things. I do believe that the secretaries get a small payment. I also believe that the musicians of the lodge get a small payment. Not just like me, not me, I don't, but like the guy who sits there and plays for everybody at dinner and stuff like that. I
Oh,
think they get,
so you
they
guys
might get a little
have
check.
you guys not only have human sacrifice, but you also have musicians playing as that's happening.
Yeah, yeah, we've got guys playing.
That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it's
I know I'm
it's a
joking
fun
about the
time.
human sacrifice part, but I have to throw that in
No,
there
of course,
somewhere.
of course. I know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems pretty.
yeah, it's funny.
It seems pretty cool. It seems pretty interesting. I mean, I really appreciate you giving me all this information about it. I hope I didn't
Yeah,
overstep any boundaries as far. I mean, I feel like you're pretty good about like saying, "Hey, I can't talk about this subject. I can't talk about this kind of stuff." And plus, we've talked
yeah,
about it
yeah,
before, so I know I can't ask you like, "Hey, tell me every member's name and what they do and all that stuff."
yeah.
Yeah, is there a
Yeah.
before I let you go, is there anything that you want to plug that you want to let people know about? Do you have any albums coming out? Do you have any art that you're doing right now, or any place where people can find you for classes if you're trying to take on more people for guitar classes or anything?
Oh, that's nice of you. I wish I had an album coming out. I'm in the a slow, arduous recording process right now with some buddies of mine. So hopefully soon I'll have something. But as of right now, I don't have any date for it. I do have a SoundCloud if people are so interested and inclined. That you can go on SoundCloud. I think it's SoundCloud Audi Veritase, which is I should have made it something different because that's really hard for people to find. But if you go on SoundCloud and you look up the song Fear of Splendor, and
Feel
it's by
fear
the
of
artist
fear of splendor or
Sphere.
sphere
Sphere like a ball. Sphere
sphere
like a
of
ball.
splendor.
Sphere. Yeah,
Sphere
yeah.
of Splendor, everybody. Okay, and I'll put your Instagram
Yes.
name inside the YouTube link for this as well, so that they
Yes,
can at
yeah.
least
My Instagram.
so they can at
Yeah,
least find
that'll
you
work.
on there for
I'll
sure.
send you a link to my I'll send you a link to my SoundCloud. We'll put that down there. There's only a few tracks up there, a couple demos and things like that. But no, when I get something, I'll let you know. I'll
Okay.
definitely let you know.
Hey, perfect. I really appreciate you talking to me today, dude. We definitely have to do this again,
Of
especially if
course.
if you come over to Ohio, just get smart and come back to the Midwest. Then we'll link up and do this stuff in person.
Definitely,
I'm just
definitely.
messing
Well,
with
I
you.
will be there in I'll be there in December. So if you
Oh,
want, we
okay.
could do this again.
Hey, then I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
take some photos of you guys on some old fancy film cameras too.
Hell yeah, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Well, hey man, I appreciate it. Hope you have a good night. Let me know if you want to do this again sometime, or if you have anything like specific that comes out that you want to talk about.
Sick. Sounds good to me, man. We'll talk to you later, bud. Have a good night.
You too.